This AutoCoC one-button Impale Blade Blast Saboteur is a spiritual successor to an idea from Devilcat's video, featuring a Deadeye Autobomber setup. While I can't really understand about half of what he's saying in this video, to be honest, the character shown provides the first half of the mechanics for this build. Replica Maloney's mechanism triggers any socketed bow attacks when casting a spell. In this case, I cast Automation. Yes, automation, not what automation is actually automating. And then every second usage of this will trigger Replica Maloney's mechanism. Other instant skills work fine, but they have greater cooldowns, and when Replica Maloney's mechanism triggers, you do end up spending mana on a bow skill, and this allows for life tap mana forge setups elsewhere to be triggered instantly. While the bow based characters stop here, I further link my mana forge setup to cast on critical strike, which then further triggers Blade Vortex. As a Saboteur though, Perfect Crime allows me to trigger twice as many Blade Vortexes. Though this comes with a significant damage penalty, I don't personally care because these blades are simply the battery for my Blade Blast of Unloading, a skill which I do self-cast so that I can benefit from the double triggers while also avoiding the damage penalty of Perfect Crime. One of the main reasons why this is so much better though than pure bow skills is while Mana Forge damage is gated by the Replica Maloney's cooldown, which is 1 second, Cast on Crit cares much less about this when you're using skills like Blast Rain or Rain of Arrows of Saturation, because you can actually continuously proc CoC triggers due to the mechanics of those attack skills, allowing for a really high base damage setup for spellcasters. And while I think a full CoC automation setup would be possible, I just think that it's so much weaker than simply self-casting Blade Blast, which continues to be one of the highest baseline damage effectiveness skills in the game. Getting into the POB, it's a fairly compact tree staying mostly on the right side, however there's a little bit of stretching over here to grab AoE, and over here to get a little bit more mana reservation and influence. Now, I wouldn't really necessarily always do this, but my mana is a little bit tight, not for casting Blade Blast, but rather when I'm trying to use my focus. It actually consumes all of my mana right now, so I do need a little bit more reservation. Otherwise, I'm also running this Light of Meaning, which gives you global critical strike chance and reduced chill effect. The reduced chill effect implicit was just, it was like 20 chaos, so the same thing as the base fuel, and helps out because I'm running Brine King on my base setup right now with, I think Garu-Khan for most things. But this global critical strike chance is really helpful, even though it's only okay for damage. I mean, still decent. It's really good though for improving your cast on crit consistency. So without this, it's much harder to crit cap, and I just think it's such a cheap option to go for. You probably have never seen this pathing before on the Star of the Shadow tree unless it's super scuffed, but for this particular build it's actually quite good because Master of Blades is really strong, especially when you're facing, enemies with any amount of armor, and the Fizz Mastery is fairly free because I do take skill life costs over here on the Life Mastery. Otherwise, it should be fairly self-explanatory. There's a few pieces of tech. For example, when I'm boss, I take Perfectionist as a whole wheel instead of taking this up here and unspec. When I'm doing Awakener or I do Uber Awakener, I take this, I take CB Immune. So I really like this part of the tree because there's a lot of flexibility in terms of speccing for specific fights. So this thing felt okay against most Ubers, especially once I swapped off a regular Blade Blast. Skill-wise, in my main links, I'm running a pretty standard Fizz Blade Blast of Unloading. I'm using Arcane Surge. This isn't normally something that I see, but I think it's fairly good because I am mana-based, and I do want to retain my ES pool because I'm playing Ghost Dance and Ghost Shrouds and that sort of thing. Aura-wise, I got Flesh and Stone, Pride, also an Arrogance, Precision, and then I have Automation linked to Sealskin. I don't really care what this is actually linked to. I don't really count Sealskin in my defense, but Automation is able to be used once every 0.48 seconds, I think, something like that. And the thing with Automation is that you can't really automate automation unless you go for the number lock trick. It's fairly well known. It's a really old tech. You can probably find it somewhere in PoE. Let's look it up on Reddit, but it does allow you to automate one instant skill. My battery is in my weapon. This is actually a cast on crit bow, and then I use Blast Rain as my trigger because I think it's the most consistent single target trigger CoC bow skill. It's linked with Mana Forge, Life Tap, GMP for a few more arrows, give you a bit more triggers, ICS for crit cap more easily, and then Blade Vortex. My last aura here, I think, is Grace, and I'm running Flame Dash. Because I'm a one movement skill build, which does suck to do, I play Flame Dash over Frostblink. And then in Replica Maloney's, so my initial bow trigger, these are Frenzy, Roa Sat, and Power Charge on crit. Pretty straightforward. In my helmet, I run a 4 focus setup, something I like to do on a lot of cheaper builds. In this case, I run Vulnerability Punishment, Assmark, and Frost Shield. Even though I'm not a Trickster and Inquisitor with a ton of ES regen, Frost Shield is able to get pretty good use because I do have instant leech from this mastery, a ton of leech from this, and unlike poison builds or, like ignite builds or whatever it may be, Fizz hit builds actually do a good amount of damage. And then finally, I have Enfeeble on Curse and Hit Gloves. Let's go through uniques first. Replica Maloney's, self-explanatory. Entropic Devastation, this is what enables sort of crit spellcasters. I think it's fairly okay. I think going Poison is actually fairly similar, I think, in terms of damage. Fairly comparable, rather. And then I run a Replica Dragon Fangs, just, you know, fairly cheap option, Blade Blast +3. I still play for Anathema on this build, and I found a Corrupted 5 mana on hit, which helps out with just more responsive mana generation, but I didn't find that I actually needed this. In terms of jewels that are unique, I run the Forbidden set for Escape Artist. Super cheap, they're like 20C a jewel. I think they're still really, really good. They give me something like 1000 ES and a bit more evasion from the helmet. My Watcher's Eyes +2 Impale, also fairly cheap, I think about 1 Divine, and then a Lethal Pride. I think this is focusing mostly on double damage, but things like Fizz damage are also good. Fire Res is solid. I have Endurance Charge on kill over here, but there's a lot of options. And then lastly, I mentioned the Light of Meaning already. Rare items. So this bow. Unlike a lot of other builds, this doesn't need any attack speed because you're playing purely trigger-based bow attacks, so you just use an Essence of Woe and go for cast on crit and then benchcraft crit chance. You just want to have an open suffix afterwards to benchcraft crit chance. That's it. Should cost about a Divine on average. Shouldn't be too much. I'm using the same helmet and armor from last build just because, you know, I like them and I'm lazy, didn't want to trade. Bought some boots, needed a lot of res. I guess I forgot to roll implicits onto this as well. But yeah, if I was going to, CDR is not that important because I'm not able to hit the 52 or 52% CDR breakpoint, but yeah, I would probably go for like action speed, maybe avoid stun, that sort of thing. This ring, the base was really cheap. Fractured, Delve, Fizz Leech was like, I don't know, 1 Chaos, 5 Chaos, something like that. And then I just did standard Ringcraft, Reforged Chaos with Harvest Juice until I got something reasonably acceptable. You can see this thing doesn't even have life on it, but I don't, you know, really care. And then as far as the belt goes, just life res, Stygian. I used Essences of Hatred on this. I mean, Tri-Res belts are easy to craft. And then I run an Abyss Jewel. This is mostly to get stun avoidance. This is the most important part of what I was thinking of. End up getting life, phasing, and all res too, but mostly just wanted stun avoidance. A double stun avoid jewel would have been really nice also, so then I could have skipped this pathing, and then just taken Perfectionist, but yeah, it is what it is. And then lastly, I run a large cluster over here. I heard Iron Breaker was pretty noticeable for some people. I don't personally know, but this was the cheapest Fizz cluster combination I could find. It was like, you know, 30 Chaos, that is what it is. And then the one thing to note about Flask is that I do like to run a crit flash generation Diamond Flask, especially on high hit rate crit builds. So yeah, that pretty much rounds out the build. It's a really, really cool system of triggers, I think, that can be applied in a bunch of different ways, whether you want to play pure bow skills, whether you want to automate a cast on crit setup. Really nice when you want to automate a cast on crit utility setup, something like this. Other battery skills, you know, obviously there's like detonate dead options, but yeah, I think a pretty cool concept to play. Ended up being decent, not actually quite as good as my last build, but still fairly solid in terms of having a nice playstyle. Obviously has more than enough damage to do all the content in the game. Defensively, it's okay. It's enough that I can actually do the Ubers usually without dying, but not super spectacular, but definitely something that'd be really fun to push into the higher end.